Hello folks, and welcome to another in the series of Warhammer Underworlds painting tutorials. This week I am painting up Grandfather's Gardeners, and I am revisiting a technique that I absolutely adore doing. I haven't done it in a few years now. I'm really excited to get to mess around with it again and to get to show you guys how I do this technique. We've already done a standard kind of layer, simple, opaque paint technique. We've used a kind of my take on slap chop with Zenithal followed by contrast paints. This time I'm really pulling out all the stops, and I am going to use the airbrush. So don't be scared, don't run away. This is going to be fine. I really want to demonstrate that you can use the airbrush to get some pretty cool effects even on infantry figures. It doesn't take a lot of practice to get this done. You want a little bit of trigger control. If you want to see more basic stuff on how to airbrush, check out some of my past videos like this one. But for this particular video, I'm going to be talking more about placement and technique rather than the specific kind of mechanics of airbrushing. Let's dive into it. Now, it is pretty cold, pretty wet, pretty miserable in California right now. I didn't want to go outside and rattle can prime these, so I thought I would do that with the airbrush as well. So I use Stynylrez Res Black Primer. It is kind of ready to go out of the pot. There's no thinning required. It's not as strong an adhesion of a primer as rattle can would be, but in a pinch it does great. So, quickly primed all of the Grandfather's Gardeners figures up with a black prime. We're going to now airbrush on our Zenithal layer. Now, I am going to be using a lot of translucent paints in this. In particular, some contrast paints, but applied through the airbrush, which has a slightly different effect. But because of this, the Zenithal is actually really quite important. It's no longer just a map like it was for us when we were doing solid opaque paints. It's not quite the same as when we were using contrast paints with a brush. And I'm taking a little bit more care and attention to this. I generally want these models to be a little bit desaturated. I don't want super bright poppy colors on these. They're kind of nurgly and gross and disgusting and browns and tertiary color hues. So my first step is getting a Zenithal of grey. I used Stynylrez Res Grey Primer for this. This is a kind of general all over Zenithal. I'm just moving it around the model, applying it from the top down, rolling the airbrush down a little bit to get a decent amount of coverage, and getting a good grey prime over that black. Once we've done that, we're going to then really build up a stronger Zenith with, in particular areas, particularly the face, the head, the hands as well potentially, depending on the sculpt. And to do this, I am going to use my favorite white to run through an airbrush, which is Liquitex Ink Titanium White. It doesn't need thinning, it doesn't clog your airbrush, it sprays out super fine really nicely. The only thing is make sure you really shake it before you put it in to your airbrush. That's true for all paints, but especially anything that's got titanium white in it. It's a heavy body pigment. It does tend to settle out quite quickly, and if you don't shake it up, then you're going to have a few issues. Now with Squart, there are those big wings, and I don't actually want to preserve the Zenithal on those. So with the titanium white ink, I'm going to go in and I'm going to be a little heavy-handed just to get a nice even white coverage. This is going to set me up nicely to do that kind of rainbowy, prismatic look to the wings that I'm going to do later on. I'm also going to Zenithal the bases. Now, it's a little trickier to Zenithal bases because if you just do it from top down, like you would with the model, you tend to lose all of the detail and the definition. So I tend to roll the airbrush down and spray slightly up, again from the direction of the main source of light, so that I've still got some of those darker areas and it is not just fully blown out brightness. I also kind of roll the base around a little bit so that we don't have any areas that are just super dark either. With the primer and the Zenithals completed, it's time to lay down an initial base coat, and I am using Contrast Paint's Plague Bearer Flesh, because after all, these are Plague Bearers. So we're going to go with that. We're running it through our airbrush, no need to thin or anything like that. I'm really quite lazy when I airbrush. I want to be thinning paints as little as possible. You know, if there are air paints available from a particular line, I will often choose to use those, especially if they're color matched to the regular paints, so I can bounce back and forth and not have to worry about things like thinning. In this case though, contrast paints shoot through an airbrush just fine without thinning. I am using a light trigger motion so that I don't completely blow out the model when I'm spraying this, but I just want to get a nice even coat over all of those flesh areas. I'm trying not to hit areas that are not going to be flesh colored, like staffs or loincloths, things like that, but if there's a little bit of splash over, it's not the end of the world. These are going to be quite organic looking models. There's going to be some bleed over, and we're not scared of that. So you know, anything that we want to preserve, hard edges, separate objects, things like that, we can go over with opaque paints at the end, and we'll get to that in a bit. Last thing to do, I really do want to reinforce those focal areas, so I take just a airbrush ready ivory color I have. This one is from Vallejo Model Airline, and I'm just gonna pick out and brighten up some of those key areas, hands, face, etc., just to give us a bit more of that pop, a bit more lift to once again draw the eye to those parts of the model when people are looking at it. Hey folks, please just take a quick minute here, like the video if you're enjoying it so far. Please do subscribe if you're not already. It will let you know when I do more videos, and it really helps me reach a growing audience. And don't forget to hit the notification bell. If you're feeling extra, throw a comment in there. Tell me what you're working on at the moment. I love hearing what people are painting, so let me know. And if you have any suggestions on the video, if you want any particular tips for future videos, put those in the comments too. It will determine what I do next, so let me know. Alright, back to the video. So we've kind of got our base coat set up, and now it's time to add some visual interest to that flesh. These models are mostly flesh, and we could leave it here. They'd look just fine on a tabletop. They've got, you know, some kind of shading and highlights, but we want to give more visual interest, and for this I use a collection of colors, and this is where for me the airbrush really is clutch. We could have painted on that Plague Bearer flesh with a brush. Would have given a slightly different effect, but it would have looked much the same. We could have done even our Zenithal just with a dry brush. You've seen me do that before. But this time around, I want to give some visual interest in a way that you can do with a brush, but it takes a very long time. With an airbrush, however, you're going to see it is a super quick process. So what we're going to do is take some of the old Citadel shades. If you don't have these, you can thin contrast paints or army painter speed paints. It'll work just fine. Again, I'm lazy. I don't want to have to thin paints, so I use the shades because they are very pigment light, very translucent. And so we're going to get quite a subtle effect when we airbrush these out, and that is intended. Starting off with Druchii Violet, this is to give us some bruised looking tones, really kind of purpley, unpleasant colors. I'm also going to use this to color the liquid coming out of Phlegma's pot belly, to give a nice purple hue to that. With the purples applied, I'm going to now use a little bit of a Athonian Camo shade. This is a green quite similar to the Plague Bearer's Flesh contrast paint we use, so it's not going to have a huge effect, but just kind of enriching a few areas here and there. With that done, I'm going to move on to Carroburg Crimson, another color that is really good for bruises, for maybe like more raw or injured skin. I also use this for the proboscis of Squat and for the tongue of Phlegma's Potbelly. A little bit of Agrac's Earthshade just to give some kind of older bruising brown hues. And then finally Drakenhof Nightshade, which I use a little bit to kind of apply another type of bruise color, but also just to punch up the shadows here and there where maybe I feel they've been a little bit lost with the earlier stages. That blue color really kind of darkens the Plaguebearer flesh and gives a good shadowy color to it. That is us done for the airbrushing. It's time now to crack out the brush, give a little bit more definition. I didn't film all of this. This is largely the same as my previous tutorials, but there are a couple of sections here I kind of wanted to highlight that I did capture on camera. And I think the most interesting is probably the prismatic effect on the wings. Now, for this, I took Doomfire Magenta, Athematic Blue, Karandras Green, and I forgot to get a photo of this, but also Luxion Violet. Those colors are going to be used straight out of the pot onto a wet surface so that we get nice bleeding. We do not need much paint on this. We don't want highly saturated colors for a prismatic effect like this. We're thinking pastel colors, we're thinking quite translucent. We've got a nice strong white base down. So we just apply those, kind of moving through the rainbow, starting with the purple, magenta, the Athematic Blue, and then finally the Karandras Green, to give ourselves a nice kind of prismatic rainbow effect, and wet blend it all together. If you are unhappy with the result, if you went too strong or something, if you're working quickly, and I had all of the paints open at the same time and just rinsing my brush and dipping them out between, if it really doesn't work for you, you can just wash the whole thing off, just get a lot of water, slop it on, take it off, let it dry out, and then start over. We have left the weapons up until this point fairly flat black, and I wanted to paint them up to look really rusty, nurgly, gnarly, tarnished. And to do this, I'm really not using much metal at all. I'm going to start with a warm brown. I'm just applying that with a stippling motion over almost all of the blade. Little bits of black here and there will be absolutely fine. Once we've got that down, we're then going to step up the intensity of the color and brightness with some orange. Stipple that in a lot less this time, just little bits here and there. We do want it to show through, we do want those tonal variations, but we don't need to go heavy-handed with this. Once that's dry, we're then going to just kind of a cross between dry brush and edge highlight with a silver paint. In this case, I used Speed Metal from Scale Color, as you saw me use in my other video. This is a really strong, shiny silver, so it looks like fresh edges on a blade that's otherwise tarnished, where it's just kind of had the rust scraped away and the shiny bare metal is right underneath. Now for the bases, you'll see that I had started with a magenta on the land and a really rich blue for the oceans. That was a quick airbrush job. I didn't capture it on camera, unfortunately, but simply kind of airbrushing straight down. Slightly translucent paints, preserving some of those Zenithals that we applied earlier. It's very saturated. You can see here how it's kind of distracting from the figure much more than we'd really like. So what we're going to do is knock that back by applying more realistic floor colors to it. We're going to use some grays, some browns, just applying these paints top down carefully so that we're not erasing all of the magenta, but the magenta is kept in the recesses, in the shadows. This is going to give some kind of unnatural feel to the bases. It's going to look kind of distorted, chaosy, exactly the kind of effect that we want. With a good solid dark brown, dark color in place, we're just going to lightly dry brush up with a gray, just to give us, really otherwise normal looking stone, but with just that little bit of unearthly purple magenta showing through. Last step, this is a bit of a cheat. It's something I'd probably only use on gaming pieces, but if you want something to look shiny, and especially with Squart's wings, we do want that, the easiest thing to do is just to take a little bit of gloss varnish and just apply it on the areas that we want. So for this, I did some of the squelchier areas, liquidy areas. I did the eyes of the models. I did the water on the bases as well. Just a super quick effect. Now, if you're really wanting to be careful with your gaming figures, and you normally apply maybe a matte or a satin varnish to the models before playing with them, you should probably do that before this stage, and give yourself the opportunity to get that shininess to show through without having a matte varnish over the top mute it at all. Grandfather's Gardeners. This warband views the depths of Embergard as fertile ground in which to cultivate the Garden of Nurgle, and sow their diseased seeds, while embracing the cycle of rot, ruin, and rebirth as a mastery warband. Phlegmus Potbelly has one uncomplicated duty: to spread his master's maggots and maladies across the mortal realms. He is aided by the plague-bearers Slunge, Maggoty Stroog, and bug-eyed Dripterus, plus the overgrown rotfly Squart. Welcoming the inevitable decay of all things, these fighters inspire when vulnerable. Alright folks, well that is my video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please do consider writing a comment, liking the video, subscribe if you haven't already, hit the notification bell. I love making these videos for you. I love the feedback, and I would love to do more and reach a bigger audience, and I need your help to do that. So please do take a few seconds if you can. Otherwise, I am going to be back in a few weeks with another video. I am still cooking up what I'm going to do. I might switch tacks a little bit and go into my thought process for doing a diorama for a competition entry. So if that's of interest to you, let me know. Maybe I'll make it happen. Otherwise, I will be back with some more shorts soon, I'm sure.